Hi, welcome back to the channel. On this channel, I like to talk about my writing, the writing process, but I also like to talk about creativity in general, things that inspire me, and just having a healthy mindset towards a lot of things in life, really. And today, what I want to talk about is creativity. And as I kind of started on this writing journey, I'd talk about I'm writing a novel, I'm not writing a book or something, and this comes up sometimes with my clients, sometimes it comes with my friends, and because I have my books up on the shelf over there, and they'll ask me about it sometimes, and one of the things I get a lot of is, oh, I'm not very creative. I'm not very creative. I'm not a creative person, or I wish I could be creative. Or I always had an idea for writing a novel, but or I always wanted to be a writer, but I just not the creative type or something. And so what I wanted to do is send out the message that yes, you are creative. You are a creative being. If you are a creative person, and I can say that even though I don't know who you are, and I've never met you, and probably never will. But I'm saying that because you're human. Unless the dog accidentally like hit a button on a computer or something, you're a human being, and human beings are innately creative. I think that's something that we are kind of hardwired with. Whether it's a byproduct of our larger brains, or it's a deeper spiritual value, or something, maybe just a skill that we evolved with because the creative types could survive better. Exactly why and how we are creative, I don't really know, but I can say that you are creative. Um, the best piece of evidence that I can come up with is our ancestors. Um, One, our ancestors had to be creative in the problem solving sense of things, and we tend to undermine that when we say creativity. Oh, this is a creative person, or this is we're usually talking about writing, music, or art, sculptor, painting, that sort of thing. Sometimes we'll expand that out and be like, oh, it might be dance, might be making films or animations or acting, that sort of thing. The things that usually kind of fall under the umbrella of like an art class kind of thing. And so we tend to put all our, and that's usually what people mean when they say I'm not creative. What they mean is I don't do any of those things. It's two different things. You can be very creative and not do any of the stuff that I just listed. And problem solving is a good example of that. You have a problem and you need to solve it, and so then you create something. You create a solution, whatever it is. That depends on the problem. As the old saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention. You have a need, and so then you invent something to fix that need, to fill that need, and that creation of that invention is a creative project, creative process. Um, our early ancestors realized that fire is a great way to help them survive. And in the beginning, they probably just picked up like a burning twig from a lightning strike or something like that, and then they just kind of kept that going, sort of like if you ever saw the old movie Quest for Fire, that sort of thing. The early hominids just ran around with like this little basket that had a little burning ember in it, and then they would just kind of constantly use that over and over again, and then eventually they meet more like modern humans, who then they take like a little piece of stick and a little fiber and they rub it together until smoke comes out, and then they make fire. They created a solution for the problem of we need fire, but we can't always just run around with a little burning coal and hope it never goes out. Um, Spears. I want to kill that thing over there. I don't want to get too close because it's dangerous, so I'm going to put a sharpened thing at the end of it. And in a way, what our ancestors did is they put a claw or a tooth somewhere further away from their bodies. See, as dangerous as lions and bears and wolves are, they have to get right up into you. In fact, they have to use their mouth. They have to get that right up into your face, or they have to get right up into their face in order to do damage. We don't. We can stab them from a distance, and then eventually we invented bows. Um, which I think is amazing because for a long time anthropologists assumed that bows were invented in one location and then they just got exported around the world. And it looks like, more from archaeological evidence, that actually independent tribes of humans around the world all invented bows, probably all about the same time, and then that spread out from there. We we had to be a very creative species because we don't have the natural tools for survival that most other animals have. We're not particularly big and strong. We're not fast. We don't have sharp claws. We don't have sharp teeth. We can't see at night. Our hearing isn't great. Our sense of smell isn't great. We really don't have a lot going for us as far as survival because we evolved from animals that basically just hide in trees. And once we got too big to hide from trees, we're just kind of out in the open. We aren't camouflage, so it's not even that easy for us to hide out in the world. But what we those two things. Well, these count as one thing, and then we had our brain, and there seems to be this nice feedback loop that the more we used our hands, the bigger our brains got, and the bigger our brains got, the better we could use our hands and go back and forth and back and forth, and eventually now we have high-powered rifles where you can shoot a deer from 500 yards. The deer doesn't even know that you're there because we've solved so many problems of getting food that really getting food nowadays is just not a problem. Most people who are starving, it's a distribution problem. We can't get the food to them for one reason or another, but we actually waste piles and piles of food. It's really kind of a shame. So that right there shows that humans are creative species because we solve problems. We solve problems in ways that other animals just can't. Except kind of crows and ravens. Those are smart little buggers, and they can solve a lot of puzzles to get to a little meat. Once they start really developing higher end tools, we may have to wipe them out. They may be too smart. But for the most part, we solve problems in ways that other animals just don't and can't. But also our ancestors were creative in the sort of traditional sense of making art and that sort of stuff because we have cave art. The very famous cave art, I'll try and find a picture and put up here, but the very famous cave art that they found in France, the ones of the giant buffaloes and things like that, those were created by early humans. We also know there's a good movie, I'll see if I can find a link to it, called The Cave of Forgotten Dreams. It's done by Wim Wenders, and it's basically it's a documentary about another cave that they found in France with even better art. It's been kind of it's covered in the cave, and it's very beautiful art, very beautiful primitive art, way more detailed than a lot of the stuff you see even in later periods like the Middle Ages and stuff. And what I think is really impressive is that cave appears to have never been lived in. And they had 5,000 years, thousands and thousands of years of art. They'd have a hand palm print right here, and then right next to it was another one, and there would be thousands of years difference between those hand palm prints. People just kept going back to that location, probably for some kind of worship service, maybe multiple worship services. But to make the cave art, particularly what I'm thinking of in France, that's not an easy thing to do. They would have to use black for the lines of things. Well, that's kind of easy. You make charcoal, and by the time we could make fire, that was pretty easy. But you had to gather other minerals and materials and herbs and that sort of thing, and know how to work it to make all the paints. And you had to envision what it was that you wanted to make. And then this is another detail that I didn't know until a few years ago, is that those cave paintings are 30 feet up. They're not done at eye level. They're done way up above. And so they had to somehow build a scaffold to, or maybe just have mounds of dirt or something to get up to that thing. So there was nothing easy about making that cave art, and they did it somehow, for some reason. We still don't really know why. Also, those little Venus figures, those little little stone carvings, usually of women. They're kind of overweight with the big breasts, and they might have. I've seen some others that are just a head or something else like that. Um, we don't really know why people made that either, but they did. And this is stone, and this is done by Stone Age people, so they're not using metal tools to file down these sort of things. It's not, like if I wanted to recreate that sort of thing, I could go to Hobby Lobby or Michael's or something and buy pretty much all the equipment I want, and then I just go out in the world and find a stone to kind of work on it. And I'd probably make a little Venus statue probably in an afternoon if I knew what I was doing. Um, they probably worked on those things for like, I don't know, weeks, months. I'm not even sure how they made it, so I'm not sure, that sort of thing. And so your ancestors, your ancestors' ancestors, regardless of what country you're in, what ethnicity you are, anything else like that, your ancestors were creative, and that passed on down to you, guaranteed. You cannot not be creative, because your ancestors were creative just instinctively. There was no art class for them to take. There were no YouTube videos on how to draw. They couldn't go to Hobby Lobby and just buy the materials and stuff like that. They had a need, and they invented a way to solve that need. And we don't really know why or how, but they did it. And you are really not that different than them. Human beings haven't changed much in the past 100,000 years or so, maybe longer, but the last number I heard was, modern humans as we exist today are about 100,000 years old. Um, it doesn't matter how far back you go. If you go back 50,000 years and you find someone back then and you bring them to today's period, they would probably be shorter, skinnier, dirtier, but they'd be basically us. And they'd be creative too, and they would do that sort of stuff. They would make things and create things. Um, Toddlers are innately creative. They'll tell stories. They'll make sense usually because they have poor vocabulary and they're just kind of wandering around, that sort of thing. They'll make music. What do you think the bang on the pots are all about? Making noise and stuff. If you give them a piece of paper, they will start to scribble on it, and eventually those scribbles start to turn into something else. They'll just dance around and just be goofy or whatever. Toddlers are innately just creative. Nobody has to teach it to them. Nobody has to take them to a class. They'll just do it because that's just how we're programmed. That's just how we are. You have to usually unlearn being creative. Like there's a Pablo Picasso Picasso quote who said that, every child is born an artist. The trick is to don't forget that when you become an adult. Something like that. I may be hacking it a bit. But so you are creative. There is no doubt about that. That's in my mind, that is not up for negotiation. That's not up for debate. You are creative. The question is how do you want to manifest that creativity? Do you want to tell stories? Do you want to write stories? Do you want to actually physically tell stories, even telling jokes? Stand-up comedy. Do you want to draw? Do you want to paint? Even in that realm, there's sort of like, do you want to paint in oils or acrylics or watercolors? I mean, there's all these different avenues on how to be creative. And so my encouragement to you is to, if you feel like you're not very creative, or maybe you kind of have a hunkering to be creative, but you don't really know how, you're not really sure if you should be doing it or something else like that, my is just try it. The easiest one is writing, I think, because you already speak a language. You can probably read and write in that language. You already have an idea of what stories are like because you've been hearing them your whole life, even if all you do is watch movies or TV or stuff. You have an idea of that. And then, the barrier to entry is pretty low. You're bound to be watching this on a computer or maybe a smartphone. And that computer at least has a word processor, because they all pretty much come with word processors nowadays. And so you could just start writing. And maybe I'm a little biased because I'm also a writer, but writing is probably the easiest way to get in there. But there's lots of other ways to do it too. If you have an inkling, if you have an itch, just try it. And if you have to, like if you want to be an artist, if you want to paint, there's all sorts of cheap ways, to do it. If money is a problem, you don't have to buy a full paint set. You can actually just buy like really just some black paint or maybe red paint or whatever. Get a brush. As far as surfaces to paint on, just paint on pieces of cardboard, paint on pieces of wood. It doesn't matter, just to kind of get that going. And what you'll do is if you like it, if you enjoy it, if you feel like it really kind of brings something to you, then you'll invest more, and then you'll get more back, and it just kind of just keeps going and going and going. When I wrote my first novel, I just had this itch that I just wanted to write a novel. It was almost like I want to scratch something off my bucket list before I'm close to death kind of thing. I want to write a novel before I die. And then I wrote Saga of the Scout, the first story in my New Age Rises series. Link in the description. Shameless plug. But I wrote that, and then I was like, I like this. I want to do more of this. I started writing short stories. I started writing other stories in different genres. I started reading more, and I started learning more about writing, and started reading books about writing and taking workshops and that sort of thing. And it just keeps bringing stuff back in. It helps me to deal with a lot of the stress of living. If you're watching this video, it's early 2021. You know how things, if you're watching this in the future, you know how things turn out, but we don't. So it's kind of a tense time. And having something to go to that lets you just get lost in all of this. I was watching a interview with Stephen King, who was talking about the creative process, and he said that writing is pretty much like self-hypnosis. I think that's true with probably any creative process, really. Of course, he's a writer, so he's coming at it from that perspective. But if you are really engaged in this creative process, you enter into what we call a flow state, where you're really engaged with what you're doing. Time seems to melt away. You aren't really worried about anything else. You're not really thinking about anything else, and it's a very pleasurable state for us to be in. And so I think that alone is probably a good reason to at least try and be creative. It's a great, coping mechanism, so to speak. This is my speaking as a counselor. You need these sort of coping mechanisms. But anyway, that's the take-home message is if you find yourself talking about how you're not creative or you're not very creative, push back on that. Argue against that. Just say, no, I am. Maybe I'm not in the traditional sense creative. Maybe I'm creative over on like the engineering side or a technical side because I like solving problems. I like building things. That's also creative, but push back on this notion. And if you are creative and if you admit that you're creative and you want to be creative in one of the traditional areas, but you're not really sure if you're good or not, then just try it. Creativity is partly this innate talent, but it's also a skill. There are certain people who are born who are just really good at being creative. And they're going to do that, almost no matter what happens in their life. They're just naturally good at it. But that doesn't mean that they don't have to practice, they don't have to learn, they don't have to get good at it. And that's where the skill part comes in. And so even if you don't feel like you have the natural talent, like with me drawing, I am horrible at like drawing and painting and that sort of stuff. I haven't progressed since the second grade. I'm really bad at it. But I am confident that I could, if I wanted to take more classes and practice and get into it, I could get there. It would be harder for me than maybe, like I have a friend of mine who made a painting in my office, and she's just an amazing artist, and I think she probably always has been. I probably wouldn't get to her level, but I could get better than what I'm at now if I wanted to put enough effort into it. And so I think that's the sort of thing to consider. But anyway, if you would leave, comments in the description. I'm kind of always curious to see, do you feel that you're creative? Do you feel that you're not creative? If you feel like you're not creative, what's your block? What's preventing you from kind of taking that leap and actually, doing more with this? But anyway, I will talk to you next time. Bye.